Fire Emblem fans, the GOAT has returned, and this time you don't even need to sell a limb or give up an organ to be able to play it. My name is Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman, and welcome back to the channel. Hello everyone, if you enjoy what I do, including covering new releases of classic Fire Emblem titles or other turn-based strategy titles as well, then a like on this video and a subscription to the channel would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much. So what is it that we're talking about today? Well, I'm catching up on a little bit of news that's slightly old at this point, but which I think is still very important to cover due to how impactful this title is. Path of Radiance, the Fire Emblem title that started on the GameCube and then became basically impossible to acquire without chopping off body parts and selling them on the black market, has finally become much more accessible to anyone and everyone who does not feel like engaging in all of the emulation shenanigans that have been going on for many, many years now. That's right, Path of Radiance is finally available on Nintendo Switch Online with that particular subscription. While that, of course, is not an offering that is appealing to everyone, for a lot of people, especially those of you who already have the subscription, this is a great time to look into one of the most classic titles in the Fire Emblem back catalog. We're going to talk today about why this is a title that you should absolutely be playing if you have not already, especially for all of you who are new Fire Emblem fans, and that's not a derogatory term or anything, but if you've started with Awakening or later, especially with Three Houses, you should absolutely be checking out Path of Radiance, as in my opinion, it is the epitome of the classic Fire Emblem formula, and if you enjoy the franchise and have not yet played it, you are missing out. So why is this release such a big deal? It has unfortunately been a little bit difficult to access until now. If you're not one of the fortunate few like myself who actually owns the physical disc, then for many, many years you would have been looking at paying hundreds of dollars US, if not more, to be able to pick up what is, for all intents and purposes, a fairly simple GameCube game. So, I'm extremely happy to see that Nintendo has finally stepped up and put this game on an accessible service. I personally think that Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is one of the best, if not the best game in the franchise for exemplifying where Fire Emblem started and why so many people got into it before it started to evolve into the modern audience sphere. A lot of what the modern audience for Fire Emblem knows as staples of the franchise simply did not exist in Path of Radiance. Supports are much more limited, only being able to get 5 support conversations per character in an entire run of the game. There is no base function. In fact, while Path of Radiance introduced a much more robust between mission base system, it was nothing anywhere near the My Castle system or the Monastery or anything like that we come to know as a very standard mechanic for Fire Emblem. Here you just have the option to look at your characters, apply bonus XP to them, manage their inventories, go to the shop, buy some gear, and potentially look at some conversations, or maybe recruit a character that comes in between missions very specifically, and that's it. It's a very truncated, very brief experience compared to what many people would say is a almost detrimental from a time standpoint mechanic that we now have in the franchise. You still have weapon durability and the weapon triangle. Characters are very limited in what abilities they have access to, and in fact, Path of Radiance brought back abilities in a major way, harkening back to the genealogy of the Holy War and Thrace 776 style abilities that had not been seen almost in their entirety, except for Sacred Stones, through the entirety of the GBA era. And as a result, Path of Radiance can arguably be given credit for bringing the ability system back to Fire Emblem in the way that we know it today. You have Ike as the standard blue-haired lord with a sword with overall middling stats who you need to baby throughout the entire game and has a set promotion time. You don't have branching promotion paths. At most, you might be able to choose a new weapon type that a character can get on promotion. There's no reclassing of characters. There's no over-the-top mechanics or combat systems like the engage system or pair-up or anything of the like. Just raw stats and intelligent positioning on the battlefield to ensure that the capabilities of your units and the weapon types that they have available make them more likely to survive the enemy turn than they otherwise would be, and hoping beyond all hope that they actually do so, because finally, there's no turn back system, there's no turn wheel, there's no Dragon's Pulse, there's no way to mitigate a bad run of luck unless you decide to use the built-in save state system that Nintendo Switch Online does give to you. All told, Path of Radiance really is the last bastion and the ultimate refinement of the OG Fire Emblem formula, and to me, It exemplifies a little bit of what we need to return to in Fire Emblem to mitigate some of the complaints that the community has had about where the modern franchise has been going. You see, Path of Radiance isn't a particularly difficult game. Sure, there is a hard mode, and that hard mode does actually introduce some decent changes to some core aspects of the campaign compared to what you would see on the easy or normal modes, but it is still by no means anywhere near the difficulty of FE Fate's hard mode, especially in Conquest, or Maddening mode in FE Engage, which are much tighter and more harshly controlled experiences in terms of enemy strength and capability. However, that doesn't mean that you're free from paying attention to what you're doing with your characters, especially in terms of your team building from mission to mission. This means that over the course of a campaign, you might cruise through some of the earlier missions, but suddenly find yourself coming up against more and more difficult objectives and enemies that make you stop and reconsider just a little bit what you have available to you and how you want to utilize those resources as you wind up actually having to deal with more complicated encounters. It's not a total brain drain, but it does make you stop and actually think for a second, and I feel like that's where Fire Emblem most shines at a base level. I'm certainly not going to complain about having experiences available like Conquest or Engage Maddening. I do really enjoy that more hardcore, complicated strategic level of thinking, but at the end of the day, for me, what Fire Emblem has always been has been a story-driven strategic experience where, as I get comfortable with the systems that are available to me, I'm able to settle into a rhythm of approaching maps, seeing what enemies are on the board, what they have available to them, what objectives and bonus objectives I may be expected to complete, and then figuring out how I can best apply the team that I have currently to be able to achieve those objectives. There's not a ton of middle management running around a base being taken out of the experience. There's not a ton of hardcore moment to moment. If any single aspect of this enemy turn goes wrong, I'm going to have to use a Dragon's Pulse and go back and reset or restart the map entirely. There is permadeath if I want to engage with it, but these maps are not so punishing that if I decide to restart, it's going to be an hour and a half before I have to get to the same position that I was in before. It's a much more comfortable middle ground. I feel like that's where Fire Emblem has always shown the most. Even in that overall middling difficulty, you have a ton of replayability available to you. Because supports are limited, because you have so many characters that you could use, but overall very few deployment slots, you're encouraged to play through the game multiple times on different difficulties to test out different support combinations, to test out different characters that you may or may not have used before, and to play around with different forging options or application of status boosts and the like to see how you may be more or less capable of clearing particular missions. Seeing as how most chapters in Path of Radiance are fairly approachable, even if they have small moments of intrigue or difficulty in them, with occasional huge jumps in difficulty that can make very standout, infamous fights over the course of the campaign, it's not particularly daunting to decide to jump in and see what you're able to do. And that means it's very easy to decide to boot up a new campaign of the game and see what you're able to play around with, especially because you do unlock other options such as fixed growths mode or bands that can increase or apply bonuses to your stats, or the challenge maps that with successive campaign clears will give you more and more unique characters to play around with. The approachability of the game allows you to dive more into it and get more invested in the style of the franchise. And I feel like that's something that's been lost a lot over the last few years, maybe 5-ish years of Fire Emblem releases, or I guess, God, even getting closer to 10 now because I'm getting old, where between the in-between mission monastery or my castle systems that drain so much time, and what I feel is a severe mismatch in difficulty of either baby's first tactical game difficulty or absolute teeth-grinding, bone-crunching, marauding through the trenches difficulty, there's not really a super strong middle ground that's very approachable for fun and easy challenge runs and casual gameplay. Add on to that the fact that Path of Radiance does have a direct sequel in Radiant Dawn, where you're actually able to transfer your save data over and get certain bonuses, such as items that allow you to forge better weapons, or direct stat boosts to characters that started in Path of Radiance and who you can encounter later in Radiant Dawn, and you have so much incentive to play these games over and over again. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I have played Path of Radiance into Radiant Dawn I think 15 times over the years at this point, because I would play it every winter when I was on winter break from high school through college, and even afterwards for a while because I had the physical media for them. I'd toss Path of Radiance in my Wii, decide what characters I wanted to use, make sure that I had my memory card installed, and I would blast through. I would have a great time rediscovering these characters, checking out new support conversations I'd never tried before. Maybe if I want a little bit more of a challenge, I'd play on hard mode. If I wanted to just have a little bit of a fun time in the world, I'd play on normal mode, whatever. And I'd have the opportunity to go through and really master the game by figuring out the best ways to maximize XP, to really pump stat growths, to make the best characters that I could, to then approach the objectively much more difficult Radiant Dawn. Then I could jump into Radiant Dawn and enjoy all the aspects of that much more serious, difficult, mechanically dense, and complicated title. It made for a great duology, and if Nintendo is ever able to bring the Wii titles to the Nintendo Switch Online experience, I can only hope that they're able to actually make that save transfer system work, because I do think that it is an intrinsic part of Path of Radiance. Again, as far as the overall Fire Emblem franchise is concerned, though, being able to sit down and play through Path of Radiance again in a much more easily accessible format has made me really realize how much I miss this old school style of Fire Emblem. Because think about it, like, yes, the accessibility of hacking is not really there for the more modern titles, but at the same time, given how much more dense those games are, I don't know that we would ever see the same level of community engagement with them in terms of making new sprites, new scenarios, new music, creating essentially entirely new separate games just in the engines that Fire Emblem provided, as we did with like the GBA era. And while Path of Radiance maybe doesn't have that same level of engagement because it is a 3D title, it's on a different system, etc., etc., it has all of the same building blocks as the GBA games, but expanded on. And to me, it's the epitome of what made Fire Emblem great, even if it hadn't yet hit the mainstream. And so that's why I feel if you are a new convert to the franchise that started with Awakening, Fates, Three Houses, Engage, you really should go back now, since it is so much easier to do than it has ever been before, and actually play Path of Radiance to get that feeling of OG Fire Emblem. I feel it gives a great perspective on where the franchise started, where it came from, where it has now since gone, and give you a greater appreciation not only for what you have now, but where some of your favorite characters, mechanics, tropes, etc. came from. And with any luck, Nintendo will see a little bit of the need to return to some of that OG spirit, and we'll have some more of that going forward into Fortune's Weave when that eventually releases this year. I, for one, absolutely plan on putting out a few videos about Path of Radiance, some tier lists, some guides, some discussion, because I kind of forgot just how much I love it. It's been a good few years since I had the opportunity to do the POR into RD run that I always used to enjoy so much, and I absolutely intend to do so now, probably on stream if I have the opportunity. In the interim, while I'm working on getting those videos out, I do highly encourage that you check out fellow creators such as Danny Doyle, who are doing Path of Radiance coverage right now due to this new release on NSO. They have great content. They're very enjoyable to watch. I highly encourage that you check them out, and I do have their links in the description down below. And please let me know, would you like to see a return to a little bit of this more classic formula? Do you feel, if you're an old head, that it's important for some of these newer fans to check out these older games and see where the franchise started and why we all love it so much? Or do you feel like we've seen too many advances in the formula and there's no going back, rather just going forward into newer and greater things? I'd love to see all of those discussions in the comments below, as I do have a lot of thoughts about the future of Fire Emblem myself. But regardless of where those conversations go, I'm going to wrap this one up here. My name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope that you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there, everybody. And remember, be good to each other, y'all. Bye now.